topic was further debated during the panel discussion, Driving Inclusive Development Through CSR, a PSU perspective.
Well, corporate social responsibility is a term which evokes mixed reactions, and those reactions range from fear, pessimism, negativity, but perhaps some positivity, though that's more of a rare emotion. Private sector typically is up in arms against what they call mandated corporate social responsibility. But what's the view from public sector enterprises? They themselves are already mandated with a heavy social sector obligation. Do they view it as some sort of a top-down approach, another burden, or do they think that they can weave this into the normal business strategy? To discuss this and more, we've got a very distinguished panel who's joining us right now to debate the entire nuance, the different strands of this debate. First up, mandated by law. Ladies and gentlemen, in India, CSR is mandated by law. This is something which has queered the pitch in India. Opening comments. Should it have been mandated by law?
Well, as a bank, as a public sector bank, as it is, RBI tells us that we can set aside up to 1% of our net profits to spend on CSR. So we have been doing that. So I personally feel, rather than looking at whether it has been mandated by law, I think one should look at what impact one is making. I think that is more important, to see where and how far the money is going, because we are talking of large sums of money. So my concern would be more of the impact. What is the impact?
Right. Mr. Shroff, public sector enterprises are already burdened with social sector obligations, and I think they are rooted in that. Most of us on this panel, on this dais, know that. How does a public sector enterprise view this? Is it an additional burden because they're already doing it? Or is something that really can be used as a strategic differentiator? How would you view this?
My own view is that I don't think it should be mandated, it should come from within. And we have been doing that. We have been a company which is around for about 75 years as a group, and we have been doing it even before the mandate came or the word CSR came. So we believe it should come from within, and we have seen the benefit of that.
Right. Now, Container Corporation of India, I think by definition, has to get into areas which benefit stakeholders for long-term prosperity of your corporation. You've done a lot of work around the field in which you operate. But typically, do you believe that at the end of the day, maybe it doesn't reflect on your balance sheet per se, but it does add long-term value? That's a theory. Do you subscribe to that?
No, I think yes, no corporate, be it public sector or private sector, can do without its responsibility towards stakeholders and towards the places where they've built up the facilities, to take care of the area around, to take care of the people living around those areas. That has always been a primary thing. Only thing is it was not so focused earlier. One good thing that has emerged out of these DP guidelines which have been made applicable to public sector today is that now it's become a focused area. For instance, my board, when we first discussed this subject, there was a discussion, okay, this is very good. We should now concentrate on 2-3 areas rather than spreading our resources. And then board did a discussion and they said, okay, we will decide to concentrate on child education, adult education, and environmental sustainability. So it's now more focused. We were doing it. We have been spending money. Wherever we have developed facilities, we are doing some expenditures, but in a very, very unfocused manner. Now it is for creation of assets.
Okay. So, but you do believe it does create long-term value?
It does create long-term value.
Right. Yes. Mr. Asano, in India, this whole debate about mandatory, not mandatory, public sector enterprises, social obligations, what's the view from abroad? Because in the US and the UK, it's not exactly mandated. What's your view?
Well, it's interesting because CSRs in many instances, I may say something that may sound a bit controversial, but in many instances in countries like in Canada and other countries, CSR started to emerge where countries were getting into trouble, where companies were getting into trouble because of the environmental impact or social impact of their activities. And then the CSR concept started to take shape in response to the idea of, in India, to have CSR being compulsory. From a social perspective, it can probably do two things. One is to really enshrine the commitment to CSR, but also perhaps more importantly, in the long-term development perspective, is predictability of resources for social sector.
Right, taking off from what he said. Now, LIC is governed by a separate act itself. I think the basic foundation of LIC, and we've all learnt it from childhood, and your money is always safe in LIC. What more does it have to do? And how do you use this new norm for your business advantage?
See, for the life insurance product, the kind of trust which you enjoy with your people is a very vital element. And for that, whether it is corporate social responsibility, the way you are perceived in the overall community is very important. And the way the Life Insurance Corporation came out in 1956, if you look at the way it has come out, I think it is rooted in giving back to the community, to the society. The whole bedrock is based on that. And the line of business which has evolved over the years, whether it is microinsurance, whether it is social security schemes, whether it is a group term insurance, and we have our foundations, it is all towards building a business which has a human face, which enjoys the trust of the people. Because life insurance is a product which is quite a sensitive product, and it hinges on that particular element. So for CSR, we call it CSR or otherwise, I think it is very vital for us.
Every CEO needs to know his market. It's about growth. It's about strategy. It's being on top of your game. It's really about getting started. Sometimes you need to throw people out of business to stay in business. What a CEO knows, what a CEO needs to know. Let's talk business. Watch in business.
This week we go inside India's largest steel producer, Steel Authority of India at Bhilai.
Whatever gains we were getting have been nullified because of the depreciated rupee.
But despite the odds, SAIL has some big plans.
By the year 2020, our capacity will reach a level of 45 million tons.
Join us on a journey into a town synonymous with steel on Inside SAIL at these times only on Bloomberg TV India.
Presented by Accenture. High performance delivered.
अरे मैच इतनी जल्दी खत्म हो गया।
सब छुट्टियों में घूमने गए। अब हम कब जाएंगे?
मुझे भी जाना है पापा।
हम भी छुट्टियों में घूमने जाएंगे।
आपने झूठा वादा क्यों किया? घर की EMI देने के बाद कुछ बचता है क्या?
झूठा नहीं, सच्चा वादा है, क्योंकि मैंने अपना होम लोन स्टेट बैंक में शिफ्ट कर दिया है। अब EMI बहुत कम हो गया है। EMI हुआ कम, घूमने चले हम।
It's speculative. It's an instrument to hedge your risks, and it's full of action. Welcome to the world of derivatives. Catch the entire week's action and all about F&O. Analyze the market trends and find out where the street is headed.
World of Derivatives, presented by BSC Investors Protection Fund.
Presented by BSC Investors Protection Fund.
Beyond profits, beyond numbers, some businesses have a larger vision.
Today, the world is divided into the able and the disabled.
The maintenance part, we took it as a challenge. It's about having a far-reaching impact.
Our end goal is to have nearly 100,000 children in kindergarten and maybe 200,000 children more in the after-school centers.
Catch more special stories of entrepreneurs making a difference. A mission to redefine business. Down to earth.
आज क्या बात है?
आनंद।
बड़े खुश लग रहे हो।
परम आनंद।
कुछ बताओगे भी?
निर्मल आनंद।
LIC जीवन आनंद, मेजॉरिटी पर सम एश्योर्ड और बोनस, उसके बाद भी जीवन भर इंश्योरेंस का भरोसा।
मिली वो? हम, तुम और वो तो आनंद ही आनंद।
Well, Mr. Shroff, do you think, there's been some clamor from the private sector that, you haven't incentivized CSR, that, this is really tax by stealth. Instead of giving us a mandate of actually going in for CSR, you should have plainly taxed us, Where do you stand? Do you believe that, it could have been taxed, or do you think it should have been incentivized? If you're bringing in CSR to the mandatory, where do you stand?
I would be in favor of incentivizing, so you do it voluntarily, and if you do it, if there's a tangible record, if there's a clear-cut record, then you should be able to get some incentives rather than making it mandatory, you shall do it kind of thing, because then you don't put your heart into it. I have to do it, it becomes a kind of formatted exercise, so much budget has to be spent and all that. So I think it should be better incentivized, you do it voluntarily and get incentives.
And you're from LIC, my point is, this is something which, has long been clamored for, and the finance minister in a fiscally tight year can't obviously do that. So this is the best that you could do. But my point is, if you look at the act itself or the bill itself, it is not exactly mandatory. Maybe it's a question of semantics. The disclosure requirements are such that it almost makes it mandatory for you to actually tell them where have you put in the money as far as CSR is concerned. Now, do you think there is a concerted move by Indian companies, PSUs, to actually, instead of going in for philanthropy, charity, create virtuous cycles, self-sustaining, revenue-generating options? Do you see that as a trend here?
See, look at the life insurance business. The life insurance business is a business where you have to be sensitive enough. Our group insurance business, even the social security schemes, which are we administer for the government of India, they are administered so well. And apart from doing and it makes a good business sense. It makes a good business sense.
It does.
It does.
Can you give me an anecdote, an example?
The large volume, the mortality is favorable, and if the mortality is favorable to the group, that kind of a margin is passed over to the particular group. So,
but do you have a way to quantify it, capture it on the balance sheet?
You see, it is a actuarial valuation which is done, which is determining the premium on that. I'm talking about business as such. I'm not talking about from the accounting as such. So for life insurance business, the social security scheme, group term insurance schemes, and the protection itself makes a good business sense. And apart from that, we have our own foundations where we contribute in various areas like healthcare, education, and other areas. So the whole business gamut is in the form of inclusive development. Apart from the business line as such, which is the protection. We were talking about sustainability. Just imagine a financially included household.
Sure.
If the death strikes, that whole income flow for that particular family suddenly stops. And it is this particular insurance protection, life insurance protection, which keeps it sustainable. It keeps the flow of the income going on.
Okay, hold that thought. I'm going to turn my attention now to something else, which perhaps you could throw some light on. The counter argument to this whole CSR logic is that, Milton Friedman, for example, said in 1970, the business of a business is to make profits. If you're true to your shareholders, stakeholders, you're true to yourself. It is corporate social responsibility. If a McDonald's comes in and gets into health food, or is made to get into health food, do you think that's CSR? Or is this just pure business strategy? It is, of course, business strategy. Do you think it's CSR as well?
I think it's more a business strategy, to be honest, because I believe that CSR, as I mentioned, the origin of CSR at the onset in some extractive corporation, but more generally, CSR can be seen as going beyond just the profit for profit. Sure. It can be seen as a moral obligation to invest in the sector, a socio-economic sector of the communities that we are.
Let me be devil's advocate. What's wrong with the fact, if I efficiently run my corporation, if I create value for my shareholders and for my stakeholders, where is the problem?
If you look at the capacity that we would be able, this is from a UN perspective, an organization that is looking at promoting child rights in India. We see CSR as a real capacity to leverage results for children by being smart on how we are going to be leveraging resources for CSR.
Sure.
So it's not about the money. It's about how we can influence the policies and influence where other investment can take place, which can benefit on the long term, on a sustainable way, not the small project, the charity type, but looking at building systems. So I think for us, it is an area that has so much potential. The debate on being compulsory or not, I mean, I'm no expert in this, but as I said earlier, I believe that It's very interesting where India is going with having at least the public sector having compulsory 2-3% in CSR, because it means that transparency, it means that accountability will be increased to social norms. So we think that this is something that should be tested.
I'll come back to how the model has been tested abroad in the US and the UK, but I just want to turn to Mr. Gupta. You know, this entire concept of CSR, do you see a model evolving here? Or because they have a particular model, we are evolving our own definitions given our own Indian context. What could be a workable model, you know, which is great from a PSU point of view, which doesn't irk the private sector, which lets them do their business and create value for stakeholders? What's a workable model?
See, ultimately, whatever one does has to relate to business. And even for PSUs, that is true. I'll give you an example of one particular project which may explain the things. We have a subsidiary company which is dealing in the fresh fruit logistics, farm to table. We are buying products, keeping them in CA stores, which enhance the shelf life. Now, when we were procuring basically from fruits from growing areas, we came across this fact that Indian productivity is pits against the foreign productivity. For instance, in apples, Indian productivity was only 40% of what the productivity could have been. And this we took up as a CSR project. It is not going to give us direct benefit.
Right.
But then we have identified some orchards and we have called a foreign team, and now we are making a project for them for inclusive of rainwater harvesting and getting them better quality of saplings which need to be replaced with a long-term objective of their getting a better yield in the future.
Sure.
They have got no commitment to me that they will give their product to me. It's orchard owners, I may not be in that business later on. But this is something which we thought that we are earning because of them. We have made a system for them, but they should be the full beneficiary of the system. Now, my directors are very, very happy. They said, yes, this is something which we are doing, which will ultimately help us. Because my company is there seen as a company which is doing something really.
So you believe that the virtuous cycle is happening?
It is happening.
You know, where you actually create livelihoods,
now
you create revenue
If you
streams.
ask me to really put its impact on the balance sheet, I won't be able to do that at all. And but that is not the idea. It's happening. It's going to help the companies operating in this space.
But tell me,
that becomes an internalized strategy principle.
I agree, but tell me, you're a businessman in the sense you've got a shareholder somewhere. He's putting in his money. Somewhere it needs to be quantified, it needs to be captured. Even in terms of value. May not be tomorrow, but somewhere it needs to come back. Do you have any measurable tools? And I say this because Dun & Bradstreet has done a survey, and Mr. Sampath just referred to it, saying that 82% of the corporate survey said that they have measurable tools to quantify, you know, the benefits from CSR activity. Do you have any kind of tools at your disposal?
No, I'm afraid we don't have, and in fact the guidelines also very clearly said, initial guidelines and the revised guidelines which have come have relaxed it. Guidelines said that whatever you do for your business purposes is not CSR.
Sure.
You can't be doing it for your staff. That is not CSR. That public sectors have been doing. CSR is something which is done for outside business for improving the catchment area. It is only in the revised guidelines which have come 6 months back in which they said, okay, if you are making a school and if up to 25% of your staff also benefits by that school, it can be counted in CSR.
Yes.
This was not there earlier.
Sure.
So that direct benefit of that will not come on your balance sheet at all. It is not the idea. Idea is the indirect benefit coming.
This is the new age algorithmic high-frequency trading-driven strategy.
The manufacturer cutting down without any
Sorry that we are breaking for you right now here. Finance Ministry is not going to levy any extra tax. Coal India is unable to assure maximum fuel supply. Welcome to the big story. I'm Vivek Law.
trades every day.
Every morning, our eyes are set on the early morning buzz.
The opening bell rings and trading begins.
We look out for the most relevant happenings in the stock market.
Relevant to India Inc., the economy, and most importantly, to you.
So join us
on First Trades.
Presented by BSE Investors Protection Fund.
German technology, robotic quality control, tamper-proof packing, Bharati Cement, 3 times better.
3 times better.
Thank you, Fight Back team. I thank Fight Back.
Thank you so much for your help and support, Fight Back.
I immediately got a reply from Fight Back. I really wanted to thank Bloomberg for taking this up and Fight Back.
What took 2 years, it just took 4 days for the problem to get resolved.
I personally like to thank Vivek Law.
We will continue to protect your rights as a consumer and keep a vigil on those who pose a threat to your money.
It has been a day where the government has faced much ire from the opposition.
We've seen the bulls take charge of the market.
Senior Asia economist at JP Morgan, Jahangir Aziz, says
6.7% looks a tad difficult to read.
Political instability is leading to several regulatory hurdles.
As ever, this edition of The Final Word is going to be a fact one.
Good governance and CSR, and I'm sure one is a subset of the other. How do you define these two, and where do these tie up? Where is the overlap conceptually?
Conceptually, the good governance and the CSR, I think CSR is the underpin is good governance. CSR means giving it back to the society, and then it's a long term. You talked about how do you capture it in the balance sheet. I believe these intangibles ultimately get captured in your brand equity. And it is your brand, which is ultimately helps the customer in identifying and then making the sale. So whatever you do, which leaves a good feeling in the community, ultimately gets captured into your brand, which puts a loop back into your so-called marketing, into your top line or the bottom line.
Which you can then leverage.
Yes. Sure. So if it is a good governance, it is important that CSR is a part of it.
Now, taking off from where he left off, ITC, for example, is a classic case of a company having used CSR as a differentiator, as a strategic differentiator. The e-Chaupal initiative, it's, ITC, it's a company in India, it's a big brand, which has got into initiatives with farmers, inclusion initiatives, which has ultimately benefited the companies. I just want to ask the panelists, and if you can take the question, how do you therefore use CSR as a strategic differentiator? Because clearly, the companies like Tata's, ITC have done that.
See, in SBI, and as I said, we've been doing CSR since 1973. And as I said, it's really embedded in our business initiatives. We were the pioneers for differential interest rates, DIR lending, which was giving loans at very low rates to, basket weavers, artisans, So this is not anything which is really new, that we are doing. I think really from what we really need to see is is that impact assessment, to see how far and how much and how long that the impact is going to be. I think that is the important part. But I think it makes sense, to have all these initiatives, because see, now everybody is moving into the doing financial inclusion. Even the private sector banks, they've realized, So I think it's just that we've been there earlier. and that's it. So
I'm sure. You know, from the OECD, run us through the OECD experience, the experience in the developed markets. How is CSR practiced there by the leading corporations? And they've got some serious lobbies going there. We all know that. So how do the Walmarts of the world, the Exxon Mobils of the world, how do they drive their CSR activities?
Well, from what I can maybe talk about Canada, which I know a bit better. The extractive company, as an example, the public sector in Canada, who will have a lot of business in Africa, as an example, they will ensure that their CSR focuses on sustainable development and economic and also equitable growth. So they would invest in the sectors where they are in the countries over time, because this is not a short-term investment. They are there to stay, and this is what they are going to be investing. So this is a pattern that is. But I have also seen in other instances, being part of the eastern part of Canada, where iron ore and also companies extracting copper, where they have done their job as a corporate, meaning that they've been able to invest in the infrastructure, they've been investing in salary and social. But at the end of the day, when the global fluctuation of prices, they just close the shop, they move away, and the impact environment hasn't been addressed in 40 years.
That's the problem.
That's the flip side.
That's the problem.
And that's why we are arguing that CSR is more than just the short-term social project that will provide good conscience. This is about a moral obligation that you have in your community to invest on the long term.